All right. Hi, everyone. It's 11 o'clock, which means it is time for our first presentation. My name is Taryn Marks. I am one of the members of the Spring Institute Planning Committee, and I am delighted to introduce our next speaker, Andrew Gurthet. He is the head of research services at Santa Clara University. If you look at his bio, you can see he's done all sorts of things, including working at Santa Clara in various capacities. He's also teaching advanced legal research, and he co-teaches the legal technology and innovation course. He is also our incoming NoCal treasurer. He's going to be talking to us today about succession planning, best practices, and strategies. Andrew, take it away. Welcome.
Thank you, Taryn. I want to bring up, I have a PowerPoint that I want to bring up. So hopefully you guys should be able to see this. Can everybody see my screen? I actually need to see you guys. If you can put in the chat, if you cannot see it.
We can see it, yes.
All right, good. So let me now, you gotta play it. Okay. So thank you again, Taryn. And it's a little difficult for me to follow up behind David Latt with his very interesting topic and conversation with mine on succession planning. But so be it. I sometimes feel like it's similar with advanced legal research. As Darren mentioned, I am the current head of public services, research services here at Santa Clara. And hold on, I have to somehow get myself in here so that I can see this. There. Okay, sorry, I'm kind of fooling with the technology and moving things so I can see what I'm looking at. Before I begin, I just want to say that I finished up this slide deck on Wednesday, and I ran my presentation by my daughter, and I figured that if anybody was going to be critical of it and have things to say and an opinion about it, it would be her. And so I did that, and she came back and actually was very complimentary and said it was very good and that Dad knew more on this than she thought. But she did indicate that she was confused by the travel theme that kind of runs through the PowerPoint. And so at first that bugged me because I thought she's in college and smart and she should be able to pick that up right away. But then I thought, she is in college and smart, and maybe it's me that's the problem. So I wanted to just say that these PowerPoint slides are designed from the perspective of the employer, specifically that you are a law library director and about to retire and pack your bags and head to Bora Bora. But you first realize that you need a succession plan in place, and you do not have one. So that is kind of where these slides and this PowerPoint and the whole theme of this flows from. So the first thing on this is, of course, the agenda. I'm going to start at the top of what is succession planning, just kind of a quick overview of the definition of it. And then work my way through these various points and eventually down to the second to last one there called how do you successfully succession plan? And that's kind of the heart of this and kind of where I think we all want to be. And then I want to end with, but what about reality? Which is, I'm hoping to open up for about 10 to 15 minutes of conversation on it, because the one thing, the succession plans on paper are great, but there is, I couldn't help but think, a lot of reality that kind of interferes and gets in the way of that. And I would like to kind of end on that. Before I begin, though, you'll see over on the little front of the car on the slide, there is a little squirrel down there. And as I mentioned earlier, these are designed from the point of view of the employer, because everything I've read, everything that I looked into on this is primarily from that perspective, because it is the employer that can set the succession plan and can control it and change it. But there is the other perspective, which is the squirrel's perspective on this, and that is of the employee, and especially those lower down in the organization. They may not have much control or any say in the succession plan, but they can be very much impacted by it, kind of like the little squirrel about to be run over by the car there. So I just wanted to point that out, that was the thing that really became evident to me in looking into this, is that there's really two perspectives. Even though most of the stuff I've read and was looked into is again from the employer's perspective, and this is designed from that, I can't but help look at it often from the squirrel's point of view, because I feel like I've been that squirrel in many organizations. And to be honest, I started my career in law libraries in 1996 and have worked for a number of law libraries over that period. And I am not aware of one of them that actually had a succession plan in place. Or if they did, I, as the squirrel, the employee, was not aware of it. And that's something that's very important, that if there is a succession plan, it has to be transparent and available to everybody. So, and also I just want to say a quick flashback here to a gray day this past December. I have to confess that I knew nothing really about succession planning other than what I have experienced over the course of my career. It's not something that was a dying passion for me, and I certainly do not profess to be an HR expert on this. But it has been a really fun learning experience over the past 4 to 5 months. And so everything on this is kind of what I've learned, and then also what I've experienced on it over the past almost 30 years. So bear with me a little bit. I, again, am a librarian and not an HR expert on succession planning. So with that, fortunately, being a librarian, I do know where to go find materials. And I went out and have looked through quite a lot of different stuff. There is, I have to say, overwhelming amount of materials out there on succession planning. All of it, except for a very, very small bit, is really from the private business side. There is very little, if anything, that is directed about succession planning in libraries. And that's really what I was trying to look at, was for libraries, not for corporations and big businesses or small businesses or anything. So, and I bring that up on this slide because I'm not going to read my slides, except in a few little cases, and this is one. What is succession planning? And succession planning is a deliberate and systematic effort by an organization to ensure leadership continuity in key positions, retain and develop intellectual knowledge capital for the future, and encourage individual advancement. And this comes from Succession Planning and Implementation in Libraries. And this is a 2014 book. It really was kind of the Bible for me in learning. And if you're really serious about this, I would really recommend getting this book and delving into it. It has a lot to say. The other good source was, I have to move my little screen, sorry about that. Succession Planning in the Library, Developing Leaders, Managing Change. This is a 2010 book. So it's getting a little on the older side. My daughter would think it's ancient. Actually, she would think it's ancient because it's a book. But a lot of this doesn't change. And so it was also a very good source for me. The other one, if you were at the Boston 2023 annual conference this past year, on the very last day, and I think it was in the very last slot, so I unfortunately was not there, there was a presentation done by Amy Carr, Sabrina Sandy, and Donna Trimble called Are You Ready? Succession Planning Done Right. They did an excellent job at talking about succession planning. So if you have a chance, go into AALL and dig around, and you will find it like I did and find that it's very, very informative. The last one, which they actually brought up, was the Society for Human Resource Management's website. They have a lot of articles on succession planning. So those were kind of the main areas that I went into. And if you're, again, serious about this, I would recommend this is going to be in your launching pad for that. So that is what is succession planning. And now, why is my screen not moving forward? Hold on, everyone. Oop, did I go too far? Yep. All right. So why is it important? These are kind of the few reasons that were set out and that I've learned. The ones that are kind of in that orange color, I want to point out a little closer and talk about and discuss. And so number 2 there demonstrates to employees that there is a formal process for development and advancement. And again, this one really hit me because it is the squirrel's perspective, the employee's perspective on this. And I think that this is very, very important. It really gives all employees a sense of security, knowing that there is a succession plan in place, and that, you know, if there is change and movement within the library, that it's not arbitrary. And so this again goes back to what I said earlier, that a succession plan really has to be transparent to all from top to bottom. And essentially, you know, again, as you know, continue the squirrel analogy a little bit, if a nut becomes available in the tree, me in my position, I may not be able to get that nut or be eligible for that nut, but at least I know the squirrel that does get the nut, why they got that nut, and that it wasn't just an arbitrary decision. So that one I just really want to point out struck me as being very, very important. The other one also struck me was number 4, that, you know, when you do have transitions, a lot of the work often gets pushed out to other employees. This I want to point out, it actually we sense it from the employee's point of view. You get called into the director's office and someone else has left, and now you are stuck with that person's job until they can fill the vacancy. This, however, also can be seen from the management point of view, and that I had this happen to me personally. I was the director of a library, not here in the Bay Area, several years ago, and the assistant director left rather unexpectedly. And when, you know, initially I sat down and kind of looked at how can I push out some of the responsibilities that she had to others, because I was the busy director at that time. It really dawned on me that a lot of it could not. It really had to actually push not down, but it had to push up to me. And so it ended up with me, and it made for a very unpleasant 6 months, because it took quite a bit of time to find a suitable replacement. So which actually gets to number 3 there, which is not highlighted, but, you know, having a succession plan in place does shorten position vacancy periods. And that I just offhand, I had a colleague go to the AALL Leadership Academy, and I was looking through his notes that he had taken just a couple weeks ago, and there was a little note on this saying that open vacancies can cost up to 1.5 times the employee's existing salary for that position. And so there is also just a cost element in having these vacancies go on for so long. So anyway, the other ones there, I'm not going to go down because you guys could read them, and I think most of them are self-intuitive or intuitive. We're going to go on to the next. What are the goals of succession planning? If you look back at the definition that I gave earlier, this actually, I realized in kind of looking through the different materials that the goals kind of revolved around the three things that were in that definition. And so that's why that definition became so critical and important to me. So again, the basic goals of the succession plan, and I am going to read that, are to ensure leadership continuity for critical positions, grow and retain intellectual property, knowledge, capital, and encourage individual advancements. And before I move on to the next slide, I want to point out here that critical positions is plural there. And so we're going to come and talk about that a little bit more in a minute here. So what are some of the challenges of succession plans? Again, going back, all the libraries I have worked for, I have not been aware that they've had a succession plan. So if they did, forgive me, but I think the challenges probably for all of them were too much to overcome. So these are some of them. And again, the ones that are in orange here, I'm going to highlight. The fear of death is one that was not anywhere in the reading, but it was one that was my own. And I think we all have a fear of death and retirement or being hit by that bus on the way to work. There is a lot of fear of that. It's essentially a death of not being at work anymore. And this was really actually hit me this morning when I came into work here. I get the AALL know-it-all. And if you look down, I just took a little clip. You'll see the second article there called Semi-Retired. Breaking up is hard to do. And if anybody saw that and actually read it a little bit, it's about an attorney who is semi-retired and finding it very difficult to move on from the job. And this kind of highlighted again for me that kind of that fear of you're not there anymore. And as we all know, we don't like to draw up wills, and essentially drawing up a succession plan is very similar. The other one in all this that I wanted to point out that really struck me was the library is too small for a plan. I've had personal experience with that. I used to be the senior law librarian for Apple Computer back in the day when Steve Jobs was still there and the iPhone was just coming out. Even though I was senior law librarian, I was the only law librarian there on staff. There was nobody else but me, so it was a library of one. And so had you come to me back then and said, Andrew, would need to form a succession plan for the library here, I would have kind of smirked a little bit and think, really, it's just me. So why do we need a succession plan? But we're going to talk about that a little bit more a little later, why even a library of one does need a succession plan and how to go about it. That's kind of some of the other challenges. There was one, and I'm trying to see it here. If I put it in, the other one is which I don't see, is there's a little bit of fear that if you do train somebody or bring someone on, that they will leave quickly. And so that one, I don't see it here as I run my eye down it, but that's another one that's there and definitely a challenge. So, and long and short is these are 9 or 10 challenges, but there's there's ultimately a awful lot more of these challenges. Okay, so sorry about that. All right, what are the elements of a successful succession plan? There are essentially 5 that I've identified, but I want to point out number 1 and 4. Number 1, everything I read, whether it was small articles or the full-on books themselves, they all indicated that it had to be linked to a library's larger strategic plan. And that a succession plan should promote the future objectives of the library. And this came up over and over again. And it struck me kind of a little awkwardly because I worked at libraries and been director of libraries that do not have strategic plans. And so I sense that if you work for a library that does not have a strategic plan and you start to feel overwhelmed. Like, in order to have a succession plan, I first need to have a strategic plan, and then that becomes even more of a challenge. You got to really back up here, and so. But it is really, really critically important. And a good example of this that was kind of given in one of the books that I read was, if your library has been identified at over the next few years or 5 years of having to, drastically downsize and move into a new space, probably the last thing you want to do for your succession plan is plan for somebody who has not had that experience, or to promote someone up who is actively less than encouraging or supportive of that. You ideally want to have a succession plan that ties to that strategic plan of preparing for that downsizing and has had experience in that area. So I can't stress this enough. The minute you really get into these materials and do your own research, you'll find that that is probably the most critical element of a succession plan. And I am sorry to all those that do not have a strategic plan in place. Again, like I said, I was at Apple Computer as a librarian of one. I didn't have a strategic plan. The other one is number 4 there, and that goes to the plural of critical positions that I was talking about earlier. Plans for succession plan plans for the succession of multiple positions, not just the top director position. And this, when I would read this over and over again, it kind of struck me like, well, how far down do you go if you're going to succession plan? Do you have to, go all the way down to the mailroom, for example? Fortunately, I did come across on the that HR website, there was an article that kind of addressed that. And again, it said there were 4 reasons to include other positions other than the directorship in your strategic plan. And that is obviously if the other positions are key to the strategic goals of the library, or influential within the large organization or community. And this one actually really struck me because I used to work in a public library that was part of a larger regional library system. And I, of course, as the branch manager of that public library, if I was to succession plan for myself there, it would all be about the operations of that branch. But because I was part of a larger regional library system, they had other people, other librarians, and not even in that city with me, who were community outreach librarians, and they would be critical to a successful succession plan because community outreach was incredibly important for me in my branch. You have to kind of look out beyond, and it may even be people that are not in your library that you do need to work with other departments or other organizations to succession plan for other positions. And then the last one, it has a lengthy learning curve or experiential learning, i.e. you have to do the job to learn the job. You may want a succession plan for that as well. So that is that. Now let me see if I can switch this. All right, how do you successfully succession plan? We're kind of getting into the heart of the discussion and kind of really where I want to go with this. Step 1 there is determine the need and commitment to construct a plan. And that is something that has to start right at the very beginning. You really have to know what your commitment is, not only for yourself, if you are in a director or in one of those positions that you want a succession plan for. And then you also just need to determine, the need for other people to have, to know of that plan and if they're going to be able to support you in constructing a plan. So I just wanted to point that out because a lot of times you may think that there's a lot of support and commitment within the organization, but when you actually really get into setting up these meetings and talking about it, it can fizzle out. because there's just not a lot of commitment. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. That's why I'm a little vague on it right now, because I really want to open this up to discussion later. And that's one of the realities that I mentioned early. So step 3, and then more importantly, step 4, I want to talk about, because this is where it really branches out on my own thinking, and I kind of move away from what I learned or saw or read in the books to what I learned from the books. Step 3 is identify the competencies essential for the key positions. And then step 4 is how do you fill those competencies? And I thought of those competencies, filling those competencies is essentially like filling a box. Which I called the box of competencies. And so first you identify a position that needs to be succession planned for. You identify the competencies that are required to successfully do that job in that position. And then how do you fill those competencies? And this is what I have learned. There's essentially 2 main ways: mentorship and recruitment. Mentorship is the one that fascinates me a lot more, and I'm much more preferential to that. If you can mentor someone within, I strongly suggest that you do that over recruitment, and I'll explain why in just a minute. But in regard to mentorship, there's there's obviously some advantages I listed there, as well as some disadvantages to it. But the thing I really want to point out is in mentoring, you don't just train them or send them to conferences, to AALL's Leadership Academy or whatever it is. You really have to include them in everything that you do. So once you've identified somebody that you think in the organization can move up into the position, you really need to have them almost shadow or be like attached at the hip for that. So you include them in meetings with your board of trustees, the library board of trustees. You include them in meetings if you're meeting with the city or the county or with the dean or with the top partner or the patent department or whatever it is. You include them in everything. And you make everything visible to them. And if you're a director, that includes the budget and pay. And that is stuff that can be hard to share and difficult. But if you're truly serious about it, you really, truly have to do that. And that is something that I was fortunate enough to, in one of my positions, identified somebody early on who could definitely do my position if the time came. She just needed the training, the experience. And so over the course of the next several years, we did that. And so when I did leave that position, it was kind of a no-brainer, essentially, for the Board of Trustees to pick her as the successor to the position I was in. But on the other side of this is recruitment, and that goes to back to when I worked at Apple, and then I was in a library that was very small. There was nobody else there. There was nobody to mentor, obviously. Or if you're in an organization, when you really look down and you're like, there really is no one that I can identify to bring up and mentor. So I therefore have to go out into the real world and recruit. And this is often considered the only way to succession plan. And that's why I really want to, again, recommend mentorship and bring that to the forefront here. It is really the most important thing over recruitment. And the reason for that is when you do go out and recruit, as we all have heard, and many of us, including me, have experienced, it can be chancy. Someone can look great on paper, they can do an amazing job at the interview, and then they are not the right person. And that becomes very apparent in those first weeks and months afterwards. For me, I would always prefer to mentor someone where I know that person coming up has weaknesses and, I can work with those instead of being kind of hit with those early on. Now, the other thing is with overlap is highlighted there. That is incredibly key to this. If you're going to recruit, you have to have overlap with that new incoming person. I was very fortunate in two positions going in, one at Apple. The outgoing librarian at the time, Wynn Dobbins, spent 3 months with me, uh, training me and help, getting me up to speed. And then when I became the director of the San Mateo County Law Library, the outgoing director, Karen Lutke, spent 6 weeks with me with an overlap. And both of those were invaluable and kind of springboards for me to successfully continue on with my position. We're actually having this be an issue right now at Santa Clara. We have a librarian who has been on staff for many, many years, 20 plus years, and is starting to think of retiring. Unfortunately, the university HR has made it absolutely clear that we cannot hire, we can't even post for that position until that other person has retired. And I can see, obviously being trained as a lawyer, why that's they want or that they're holding firm to that position. But it really kind of cripples us at the knees, because then we're having 20 years of experience essentially walk out the door with no ability to train that person. So the way around it, we have discovered, is the university allows us to hire consultants. And so we're going to hire back that retiring person as a consultant to train, so with overlap. So the last thing here I should say is, how do you do both of these? The first one obviously takes time, and that's the most important thing, and probably the biggest challenge for it is it takes time to send people to train. It takes time for them to come along with you to every meeting with the board of trustees or whoever it is. It takes time for them to learn, and so that is difficult. And if you're going to do mentorship, you have to realize that. On the opposite side, recruitment obviously takes documentation, and this was essentially beaten into me over and over in all these readings and articles I read on it. The incredible importance of documenting everything that position does. I was very lucky, again, going into San Mateo County Law Library. Karen Lutke not only did an overlap with me, but she had decided about a year earlier that she was retiring. And so she literally a year earlier started documenting every single thing she did, how to budget, how to pay bills, right down to, believe it or not, how often the plants in the law library should be watered. So after she left, I had 2 big binders. One was all finance and the other was operations. And those were my Bibles over the next 6 years in that position. And I cannot imagine being successful in it without those 2 big binders there. Now you will see that I changed color here a little bit on that arrow and put risky, because the point of the arrow is that you can do both. Your succession plan doesn't have to be one or the other. You can mentor someone, but you can also be looking outside as well. But I want to say that this can be risky, and I experienced this a little bit actually firsthand. Again, when I came in to be the branch manager of a public library many years ago, the regional library system had done both in their succession plan. They had been mentoring somebody in that branch to come up and be the next branch manager. At the time, they also decided they wanted to look outward and recruit and see what was else, out in the real world. Hence, they found me, they hired me. I come in and I have a very, very upset employee who was that assistant director. She really had nothing against me, but it really killed her spirit, her motivation for work. She really felt that she had been played by the larger regional library system. And so she left, and I couldn't, I felt bad about it, but unfortunately I inherited it. It wasn't something I had created. So just be very, very, very aware and very careful if you do both. If you're mentoring somebody and then also decide to recruit and look outside. And if you do, you have to be as transparent as possible with the person that is being mentored. So with that, I'm going to then move on to about 10 minutes here of open discussion. And I will maybe need a little bit help here. This is my next slide, by the way. But what about reality? And these are some of the big things that kind of came up. And, I have to tell you, there was really no answer to any of these in all of the materials I looked at. The big one, which we talked about earlier, is there's no commitment within the library to put together a succession plan. There's no time. That one, I think we all feel we're always busy. We're always getting hit with reference questions, operational questions, whatever it is. There's just no time to sit down and put this together. And there may be no consensus either. And not only is there no commitment, but the minute you get the commitment, everybody really has a really strong opinion and unwilling to work together to bring it together. And then, of course, there is no money. And that's really more towards the mentorship, sending people to conferences and workshops and things like that. So with that, I'm going to break out of this and open it up to discussion, and hopefully, let me see. I don't know, I can't really, let's see.
Yeah,
If everybody could be, is everybody unmuted? That's essentially what I'm trying to get at. So I kind of like to just kind of have everybody chime in instead of maybe by chat on this. If they have any questions regarding what I've said, or more specifically to, those, the questions there about reality.
So we do have one question in the chat, which is,
okay.
How do you process the fear of a mentee taking over from you before you're ready? Like if you are feeling pushed out, even though it's the plan for you to be pushed out, how do you deal with that? What do you lay down?
That's actually an interesting question. That the mentee kind of coming up actually is more qualified. Hold on, I'm trying to bring up the chat itself here. Yeah, so if the mentee is coming up, there's a feeling that you're being pushed out. You can really get that feeling. I've had that personal experience on that in regards to those above me. They really liked the mentee, and I got the sense they liked him more than myself in the position. And there was definitely a feeling like, okay, Andrew, it's time for you to move on. That really kind of goes to your own security. If you have to be secure in what you're doing and in your job. You are there originally for a reason, and if you're not ready to move on, then you're not ready. And that mentee has to wait that out. That is a very good question. And one that again, it just kind of, there has been that feeling in the past, like, boy, I've been feeling like they could actually do a better job at this. The thing that on that was that they actually were much more, I'm very much an introverted person. They were very much extroverted and very much engaged more with the community, the library community, than I was, and really actively out there promoting the library and various community events and things like that. And I definitely did feel a bit of insecurity. But again, it goes to you just have to recognize that it's your insecurity, and that you're not ready to move on, and it's still your position.
Great. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I actually see one here. Did you make the drawings? No, I did not. Thanks for this. I actually have to shout out to Santa Clara Law Library here. They actually sprung for me to get some stock images for this. So they paid for these, but I like them. So Yeah, thank you. Is there any other questions? Does anybody have, I guess, any input that they could provide if they're willing to unmute and just talk for a minute about some of maybe those realities, and how they have overcome like having no time or no commitment? Because again, this is something 5 months ago I knew very little about, and it's been a real pleasure just learning about this topic. And it is very, very important. And I would love to learn more about that, because that's the one thing I really feel that the materials didn't address, is that reality. Actually, I do see we do have one question coming in by chat. Would you recommend small libraries actively recruit, maintain relationships outside of their walls with an eye on succession planning long term? Yes, especially when developing folks up is not an option. Yeah, you definitely, yes, definitely. In that position again, that was the smallest library I've ever worked in. It was obviously just me. It doesn't, you do realize that there is going to be a point where you are going to leave, and the reason that succession planning is so important for those very small ones is essentially you straddle the employer. In this case, it was Apple with finding a replacement. And I really sense that Apple, as great as they are in many, many other ways, it was probably not their strength in hiring law librarians. And so it would have fallen to, actually, if I remember correctly, the chain of command there, it would have fallen to their head of the patent legal department to do so at that time. And that person obviously could probably have done a great job finding a replacement, recruiting a replacement, but I feel that I could probably have done a better job. And so, yes, that's why it would be very important to actively kind of engage the outside larger community, i.e. you guys, and just try to, create relationships with the eye that maybe there is someone there who would be interested in that position. So that's actually how I got into it, was Wynn Dobbins, who was in the position many, many years, about a year before, she actually reached out to me out of the blue and invited me down to Apple to have a lunch, and we just kind of talked, and then we just stayed in touch for about a year, and then she indicated that the position was open and would I be interested. So yes.
And it looks like Amrit has a hand raised. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for all of this. This is a question that might be beyond what any of us could answer, but I feel like this is a good place for it. Do you have any advice or strategies or foresight on how to deal with the master's degree in library science versus not having it, or the law degree versus not having it, and how that's factoring into this, and how to manage that maybe within a library and a development plan?
Yeah, that's kind of the question of our profession over and over again. There's and I talk more about the JD, to be honest, because it's when I worked at Apple, I have a JD, and in all the libraries I've worked at, the JD has been the knowledge I gained from that has been extremely helpful. But for the Apple job, and when I was at the county law library, it wasn't required. The MLS was required, and I could, I can't strip the JD away from myself and see how I would have done in those. But I found it to be, for me, very, very important and helpful. With that said, I've hired people without the JD, and they've done amazing jobs. In fact, my replacement at San Mateo County Law Library right now does not have a JD. And doing as great, if not better, a job than I did. So I don't know. It's all, and then on the opposite side is the MLS not having the MLS. I almost sense that that's probably the more important of the 2 degrees in the long run. I nothing against attorneys, but I think the MLS kind of, for me, kind of softened my attorney views, and kind of made me more aware of the larger library, so to speak, than is just a source of legal research and collection. So that's my own take on this. I'm sure everybody has their take. We just went through this here. It's really hard in regard to recruiting right now in the Bay Area. We had an open position here for months and months and months that we just were not finding the right candidate for. In the end, we hired internally, and we hired someone who does not have a JD. And it's working out fine, I have to say. I'm actually really excited about this person, and they really have potential, and that box of competencies is going to be filled. It may take many years, but he's going to get there. So that's my own feeling on it. And I think we all of us have an opinion one way or the other. And I don't think there's any right or wrong. It's all comes down to the personality and the person filling it. So if you do find someone, I should say, who's in that mentorship position, and you think about mentoring but doesn't have that JD or MLS, don't let that be the crippling thing. So
Wonderful. Well, we've reached the end of our time with Andrew, but if you have questions, I'm just going to offer him up for you to reach out to him individually. Join me in thanking Andrew for today, and our next session will start in 15 minutes. We look forward to seeing you then.
thank you, everyone.